I didn't think it was possible to make Nukitashi, the outrageously over-the-top action-sex comedy visual novel, even crazier. For its sequel is still as insane as ever. More absurd jokes, more ridiculous fights, and even more wild off-the-wall moments. But somehow, Nukitashi 2 is still able to deliver such a passionately wholesome story. Thanks to Shirobune for providing me a review copy and for showing me that even in a parallel world, minorities are still fighting back. Now, overcoming a half-naked police state government with anal penetrators and blow-up dolls apparently wasn't enough the first time. Jun fully bet he could do it again, but better. Taking place after the first game, Junosuke Tachibana and his crew have saved Saren Island, and they live peaceful lives in coexistence, perverted and non-perverted individuals alike. But then on one fateful fappin' day, Junosuke and his friends are transported to an alternate world. I'm not kidding, bear with me for a moment. And where they were transported to is a parallel world where Jun's grand achievements and fights never happened. But it's also where Junosuke actually rules alongside the FS commanders, as the nation's icon of strength and girth, his sexcellency. A wild, absurd, and illogical situation to begin with. But come on, when did this visual novel make any sense to begin with? This is a title where onoholes are used as flash grenades and assault vehicles shoot out pink dildos. But as it turns out, this parallel world idea was actually the best follow-up to Nukitashi, doubling down on absurd shenanigans and passionate declarations. And no, that's not because they gave heroin routes to Best Girl. It really is a treat for the fans. Not only do you get after stories for the main girls from the original game with lots of loving relationship goodness, but you can also get to see the more personal, private sides of the FS commanders. More specifically, how much of a complete disaster they are. Turns out being in the FS is no walk in the park either. Being such an admirable role model sure takes a toll on a person. They gotta let their hair down eventually. And that applies to everyone. The leader of the disciplinary committee and obsessed Hinami lover Rei, the first squad combat commander and die-hard darling loving slut Ikuko, and of course, the student council president and misunderstood cuckold fanatic Toka. With Jun being part of the FS here, we truly get to see the inner workings of their organization as well as what they do in their downtime. They may be crazy in their own unique ways, but they function surprisingly well together, because if left alone, I guarantee they would not have lived to survive another day. Toka herself being the worst one of them all. Tell me, how Toka, the charismatic leader of the FS, an unparalleled genius in her combat abilities and strategic planning, and arguably Saren Island's strongest individual, can't climb stairs.
無理に登ろうとすると飽きます。
And that's only one of the many ordinary affairs that Toka can't do for some reason. In fact, it's not hard to believe that this self-inflicted NTR lover is somehow even more clumsier than Asune. I'm sure babies can perform basic human functions better than her. The woman needs major correction, and it's gonna take the strongest babysitter to do so. She's the very definition of a high-maintenance woman. But while her antics are passed off as typical jokes, there is an element of authenticity to it when it is clear that Toka is on the spectrum. She may be strong, but there are certain aspects of her life that she genuinely finds difficult, and she can't understand people's feelings as easily like others. She ends up making life difficult for the people taking care of her, with no conscious thought to it. It's why she's on this island in the first place, and why she can't leave. Add in her status as the esteemed student council president, distancing herself from her subordinates by default, and you have Toka coming off as a very special individual that's very hard to approach and relate to. Exceptionally extraordinary, but dysfunctional all at the same time. Sure, she's got Rei and Ikuko backing her up, but even so, her circumstances complicates how people see Toka and her intentions, misunderstanding her rather unorthodox ideas. She can't even recognize her own true feelings at times. And yet, despite how unusual and strange her methods may be, and they are, there's no denying her well-natured wishes. It just takes a little time to understand. I appreciate the treatment Toka gets here. She gets the biggest improvement from the first game in the best way possible, while also being another representation of the original story's thematic core, while also adding romance into the mix. In a way, their eventual relationship can be described as enemies to lovers, but as you see with them as they continue to bond and understand each other, allows one to see that she was never an enemy to begin with at all. I think that Toka's route is exceptionally solid, especially with the main story, and she would be my favorite girl if Ikuko wasn't so damn precious. I didn't think it was possible for this girl to be as lovingly adoring compared to how she was in the first game. She had a goal in this one and was absolutely determined. Who would have thought the self-proclaimed virgin fag, now corrected, would end up with the biggest semen-stealing succubus around? But as Nukitashi 2 proudly demonstrates, all it takes is spending time with and learning more about that certain someone, including their past traumas and mistakes. Now Ikuko comes off as absurd to begin with, fitting in with Nukitashi's cardinal intercourse hive mind citizens. Hell, her foil from the original game is Misaki, whose personality is just anally crazy. But it's absolutely insane when I realized that she's actually the most sane out of the three leaders. I've already discussed Toka, and Rei's an uncontrollable blubbering mess I'll talk about much later, so Ikuko ends up playing the straight man for their interactions. It's so bad, Nukitashi added more characters to share the load. Her role in comedy aside, I find Ikuko's behaviors interesting to watch. She's more aware, more discerning, but also more sensitive, and that's a result of her troubled past. Ikuko's backstory was hinted at loosely in the original game, but it's here we get a full explanation from the girl herself. Sure, it's shown off comedically, but in a way that's also a hint of her nervousness and discomfort. I find that Nukitashi 2's way of diving into these characters is more pronounced than other visual novel stories, even more so for a high-octane comedy about terrorists rebelling against Plap Plap Island. In fact, it's because of its over-the-top nature that when Nukitashi does dive into its slower, dramatic moments and sensitive topics, the contrast feels so effective. Absurd and strange mannerisms and behaviors from characters are surface-level repercussions from key moments from their past, or more directly put, traumas itself. Really, who would have guessed that the passionate wanting for sex was a coping mechanism from years of abuse, while also being a proud affirmation of her gender after being denied it for so long? And we wouldn't have known about it if our characters didn't reach across the aisle and attempt to understand the other person. Love really changes a person and makes them think differently, where in the end, Ikuko was able to have an adult conversation with Jun about her thoughts and feelings, before letting him f her silly and calm on her face. Just Nukitashi things. Everyone's got their own brand of love and affection, both passionately heartwarming and just a tad problematic, ranging from seemingly off to absurdly wild jumps in logic. Romance isn't that easy, and that's explored through the girls' individual epilogue stories. Nanase exerts the same motherly wife energy as in the original story, while also highlighting how very wrong that statement is in practice. Hinami somehow manages to be wholesome and open in sharing the love, while also being extremely horny too. And Misaki is exactly how you expect it to be. Like, come on. Followed by Asune and Fumino's specific stories, these epilogues are nice add-ons for fans of the original girls. I do also appreciate how they tie up loose ends from Nanase's route. That said, it's not as impressive narrative-wise as Nukitashi 2's main story and the FS routes, but it's still enjoyable. Again, everyone shows off their love in their own special way, enough where it's bothersome to the people around them, as the couple celebrates their love. Certainly overdone jokes following suit. But as much as the side cast finds it annoying to see them, they just can't look away, as to help avoid the couple's own potential self-destruction. The subject lovebirds in any route are disastrously awkward, and it's up to the friend support group to help play Cupid, regardless if it blows up in their face. Yeah, surprisingly, the other heroines don't completely disappear off the face of the earth during the heroine routes. I honestly wonder why rom-com visual novels don't do this more often, because it leads to some hilarious moments. And for Nukitashi's cast, it's important to make the couple happy. They may be fellow losing harem members, but they still want to support and reassure their friends in their love, even if they've deluded themselves of believing that they don't deserve love in the first place. You might be wondering why Jun's so friendly with the FS and vice versa. Well, when you're collectively fighting to take down a common enemy, becoming fellow buddies isn't too far off. Remember, while the perverted sex law may be problematic, the individuals themselves aren't at fault. Most people entered the FS for financial scholarships to support their families, and some people didn't have a choice at all. And as Jun learned, they're just normal people like him and decided to create a place of coexistence. That said, there's no excusing the fact that Jun fought back against the FS and almost got them deported from the island. That guilt is something that will stay with him. Likewise, someone is the exact same after having sent so many people to the guillotine. We got a taste of Rei's circumstances in Hinami's route, which was effectively Rei's route anyway, but that's besides the point. We saw her happy when the law was reworked and she didn't have to force anyone to do something they didn't want. In fact, now that everything's things over, she lets her childish self out, popping off more often. After seeing her as the stern sergeant for so long, it's endearingly shocking and refreshing to see this messy side to her, almost reaching Misaki levels of chaos in her reactions. But now that she, June, and the other commanders are in this parallel world, they need to act as they did before or risk being outed as a traitor and losing any hope of finding a way back. Rei's route revisits those past ideas of responsibility and self-sacrifice for the sake of others. Both June and Rei held those principles, but eventually learned from those mistakes. But just because you learned doesn't absolve you of those acts you did in the past. Rei's route is dedicated to her reflection of her behaviors in the first game, leading to a full resolution of her character. It's what a sequel story of a heroine route should do, and it's very funny considering that she never officially got a route. Of course, she'll dismiss it, praising Hinami instead, even in her drunken state, but we all know the truth. Out of everyone, Rei's route is rougher than the other two, including a scene from her past that is very difficult to sit through. It's revealed as Rei opens up to June when the two of them are thrust back into that hell in this parallel world. But just like her, this world is also designed to hurt June in the worst possible ways. Who would have imagined that a Brocon-loving Asne would be shooting ray gun lasers at her own brother? That's just the tip of the iceberg here. June's a friendly guy, but it seems like his alternative version of himself decided to literally whip his cock around like he owns the place. Things are drastically different here. He's feared among his peers, his comrades don't know him at all, and his own family hates him. His cock may have tanked an RPG missile in the first game, but he can't avoid mental damage. All of this together takes a toll on him. He's more alone than ever before. While Nukitashi shows how beneficial having friends and comrades are, it also tackles the absence of them too. The feeling of loneliness and having no family to support you. June may be the main subject here, but this is echoed among the FS commanders and their routes too. Using a parallel world was an unusual choice. However, it offered another scenario to further explore the deeper feelings of June and the cast, while also reinforcing the original game's concepts, including showing how serious the stakes could have been. This parallel world is an instance of the Lude Law being the closest it's ever been to its fruition of spreading worldwide. I talked in the Nukitashi 1 video about the dystopia that this island was, but here we are on the edge of extreme mass takeover, and we're on the winning team. June and the FS commanders want to rebel, but they can't because they're the ones heading it. It's like watching a covert operation inside job, with that mystery element in the background of figuring how to get back to their original world. I joke about Nukitashi absurdities, the parallel world hijinks being the biggest offender, but it always has done a fine job of explaining the seriousness of the shifting power dynamics in these organizations. Political games might not be your fancy, but what's engaging is how Nukitashi is framing this. These organizations are fueled by the strong-willed individuals driving their own personal agendas. Agendas designed through their own beliefs and ambitions, but also created out of the traumas, issues, and regrets they suffered in the past. An elaborate scheme that can only be described as an extreme lashing out against the world that's wronged them. The antagonist of this visual novel is the same way. They just happen to take a different path than June, and it's those parallels that are extremely interesting to compare. We can understand what they're going through because we've seen it happen, but the difference between them and June is that we know it's wrong because we saw what it led up to. The antagonist in Nukitashi 2 is the perfect counter to Junosuke simply because they operate with the same mindset, but this one is even more of a threat because of how deep the loathing goes, as the minority within the minority itself. If Nukitashi 1 was about minorities rebelling back against the majority, Nukitashi 2 is about the rage of someone whose existence was never acknowledged in the first place. It's gonna take an immense effort to convince them otherwise, and this assemblance of forces underneath Junosuke with his beliefs and motivation makes Nukitashi 2 such an uplifting, rousing treat. Really, it's anime persuasion at its finest, with the final act of the main story being an absolute blast to read. One of the best action experiences you'll ever read in a visual novel, honestly. Honorable mention goes to the ending climax of Ikuko's route, not for its action sequences, but how jaw-dropping the mere concept of it is. Now, I only hinted at it slightly, but I would also like to point out one of Nukitashi 2's shining aspects. It's impressive how this game tackles LGBT+ elements in its messages and characters. Of course, it's discussed in the first game, but here it makes a huge impact. It's openly expressing both the frustration and consideration of those in the minority, no matter what type of person you are, regardless of your sexual orientation and gender identity. Some people may not accept it. Trying to make everyone understand each other is incredibly difficult. It's idealistic to create an environment where everyone can accept each other, but it's something worth fighting for, because the amount of positive things that can come from it is valuable and worthwhile. 5 out of 5 with a seal of recommendation. Now, if you enjoyed that video, consider subscribing to my Patreon if you want to further support the channel and what I do here. Thanks to everyone that's supported me thus far and into the future. You guys are fantastic. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this video over here or this one for a general recommendation. And finally, even after all this time, I still don't know what the intervaginal bucket brigade is. Just Nukitashi things.